General Tom Bowman with NPR. You talked about the no-fly zone moving toward Misrata. There are reports today that Libyan soldiers are shooting civilians in Misrata. And I'm wondering, along those lines, do you fear mission creep here? UN resolutions specifies Benghazi, but might this move on to other cities as well? And also, as a ground guy like yourself, talk about the difficulty of protecting civilians by air when the Libyan troops are in among the population.
The first step toward countering the regime from attacking civilians, whether it's in Misrata or any place else, is to ensure that we have freedom of air movement. So the first step is necessarily ensuring that we are able to extend the no-fly zone and operate our aircraft with a low level of risk. So as we extend the no-fly zone westward, I think it is likely that we may encounter some of these regimes' mobile air defense systems, and where we encounter those, we will certainly attack them. The larger point of how do you apply air power, particularly in very close combat, is a very, very difficult situation for us. And the identification and the distinction of forces in very close quarters is a particular challenge for us. So we've been very precise in our instructions to the air crews about what they may and may not do, and we are very, very conscious obviously in limiting civilian casualties. So it is always this balance that we as commanders try to apply, and ultimately these very well-trained, very well-disciplined air crews, in this case from many nations, that apply when they have observation on regime ground forces attacking civilians. Where we can, and where we can safely without risk to other civilians and causing collateral damage, we have a capability to engage in those kinds of missions. Right now over Misrata, the first effort, though, is to establish the no-fly zone, and that process is underway. And until we do that, our ability to influence activities on the ground remains somewhat limited.
Mission creep, do you worry about that?
I'm sorry, could you say again, please?
Mission creep, do you worry about that?
No, I don't worry too much about mission creep. The military mission here is pretty clear. It's very clear, frankly, and what is expected of us to do, to establish this no-fly zone, to protect civilians, to cause to get the withdrawal of regime ground forces out of Benghazi. And so I don't have a sense at all that there is mission creep. What we are looking forward to is the transition from a U.S.-led effort to the designated headquarters. But again, I'm not concerned at this point about mission creep. I think our mission is clear, and we're moving forward. And as I say, I think we are so far achieving our military objectives consistent with our mission.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, General. Spencer Ackerman with Wired. As you go after the regime's ground forces, to what degree can it really be said that you're not providing close air support for the opposition, even if you're not in contact with them?
We do not provide close air support for the opposition forces. We protect civilians. Some, I suspect, some would argue that some within the opposition may be civilians, and if they are attacked by regime forces, then we would be obliged, if we possess the capability, to try to protect them from attack. But we have no mission and no intent to provide close air support to the opposition.
Can I just follow on that, General Ham? Elizabeth Buemiller from the New York Times. You said there was no official communication or formal communication with the rebels. Can you say there are no Americans on the ground, period? with the rebels or on the ground, period? Americans of any kind?
It's been very clear to me, and I think anyone who has heard the President or the Secretary of Defense speak to this, no American boots on the ground. There are no American boots on the ground from this coalition. I think there are, frankly, I think there are some American citizens who were in Libya who chose not to leave, but no one who's a part of this coalition is on the ground. I don't know how to be more clear than that. No military boots on the ground.
General, hi, it's David Cloud with the LA Times. I know you said you're not providing close air support to the opposition, but if the opposition were to leave Benghazi, were to resume essentially offensive military operations and were to get into a clash with Libyan forces, what role, if any, would coalition aircraft or coalition forces play in supporting that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not real comfortable going down the path of hypothetical questions. I would just tie us back down to our mission. The mission is to protect civilians. If civilians are attacked, we have an obligation under the Security Council resolution and the mission that's been given to me to protect those civilians. We have no mission to support opposition forces if they should engage in offensive operations. And so that's, I guess I would just leave it at that. We protect civilians. We do not have a mission to support the opposition.
Don't you define, even now, rebel forces who are in Benghazi as civilians, in effect? I mean, if there were attacks on men holding guns who are rebel forces, would you not protect them?
It gets a little bit into some very specific parsing of this question, because again, who exactly is this opposition? It's clear to me simply from watching the reports from many of the organizations that are represented in that room that many in the opposition truly are civilians, and they are trying to protect their homes, their families, their businesses, and in doing that, some of them have taken up arms, but they're basically civilians trying to protect their civilian lives, businesses, and families. There are also, again, having seen reports from many of the organizations in that room, there are also those in the opposition that have armored vehicles and that have heavy weapons. To me, that says that those entities and those parts of the opposition are I would argue, are no longer covered under that protect civilian clause. So it's not a clear distinction, because we're not talking about a regular military force. It's a very problematic situation. What we try to do, and what we are charged with doing, is when there are threats to the civilian populace, we are obliged under the mission and under the Security Council resolution to try to protect them. Again, sometimes these are situations that brief much better at a headquarters than they do in the cockpit of an aircraft. What we have, instructions that we have given to our crews, to include down to the kneeboard information that they have, is to be very judicious in their application of force. Where they see a clear situation where civilians are threatened, then they are authorized to, and they have in the past, taken action to protect those civilians. If it's a situation where it's unclear that it is civilians who may be being attacked, then those air crews are under instruction to be very cautious and not apply military force, again, unless they are convinced that doing so would be consistent with their mission to protect civilians.
Chris?
General Chris Lawrence from CNN. How did the bombing of Muammar Gaddafi's compound tie into the mission of protecting civilians?
I think I caught a little bit of static there, but I think the question was about attacking the attacks on the compound last evening. Is that correct?
Yes, how did the attack on Qaddafi's compound tie into the mission of protecting civilians?
Yep, okay, good. I got you loud and clear that time. This is a large compound, maybe 500 or 700 meters by 1,000 or more meters. A pretty big place with lots of different buildings and facilities inside of this compound. There are some air defense systems on the perimeter. There's security. There's housing. There's normal things, you know, mess kind of facilities, and there's also a command and control facility that we are certain is a command and control facility, and we have multiple means that tell us that. And that's the facility that was attacked. And again, we do so with tremendous precision. We do so with that particular target was decided upon because degrading that command and control facility would degrade the regime's ability to control its military forces in the attack of civilians. So we think there is a very, very direct relationship in the attack on that target and the mission that we have.
Sir, it's Jennifer Griffin from Fox News. We've heard repeatedly from Pentagon officials and military commanders that Qaddafi is not a target. Can you see a situation where he remains in power? Are you worried that it will end in a stalemate? Does that concern you?
I do see a situation where that could be the case. I have, again, it's perhaps easier for me to address that than it is for others because I have a very discrete military mission. And so I could see accomplishing the military mission which has been assigned to me, and the current leader would remain the current leader. Is that ideal? I don't think anyone would say that is ideal, but I could envision that as a possible situation, at least for the current mission that I have. I would reiterate, though, that I have no mission to attack that person, and we are not doing so. We are not seeking his whereabouts or anything like that. We think we have been very effective in degrading his ability to control his regime forces, and we think we are seeing that play out in various parts of the country.
Changing in coming days?
Not significant change. The best news that I would pass on is that we are seeing growing contributions to the coalition, growing non-U.S. Contributions to the coalition. Yesterday we had, I think we flew about 60 sorties, about half of which I think were U.S. Today I think we're in the 70 or 80 sorties, something like that, and overwhelming percentage of those, probably certainly well over half of those are non-U.S. Again, added today, Canadians and Belgium. We are hopeful that other nations will continue to join this, and we know some that have made very firm offers, and we would expect to see their forces operating in the next day or two, and certainly we look forward to that. So I think that's the biggest piece of this. And then the extension of the no-fly zone essentially across the coastal part of the country, from almost from boundary to boundary, will enable us to have a greater freedom of movement. And the other thing it provides is a greater ability for humanitarian assistance to be delivered in those areas of Libya for which it may be required. While we possess certainly a very significant kinetic capability, my sense is that unless something unusual or unexpected happens, we may see a decline in the frequency of attacks. We saw it certainly, you know, from the first night. The level of Tomahawk attacks to the second night is a dramatic reduction, and I think we'll see that as well, because that's the nature of the types of targets, and it is also indicative of the effect that we have had with the initial targets, that we don't need to re-attack so many. But we do have a capability to do that, and no one should have any doubt about the remaining kinetic capability that is resident in this force, nor the will to use it. We have the capability, we have the authority, and as required, we possess the capability to bring overwhelming combat power to bear, as we have done the initial stages of this where it's been required.
Yep. General, given all you said that you expect to do in the coming days, it sounds like that there will not be a handoff of U.S. leadership to other countries anytime imminently, even though we were told kind of in the beginning that it would be within days. Is it fair to say that we're talking through the end of the week here, at least, the U.S. would be in the lead still?
I would not put a date certain on this. Of course, the first thing that's got to happen is the identification of what that organization is. But we have been from the start planning how we would affect this transition once that follow-on headquarters is established. It's not so simple as just having a handshake someplace and say, okay, you're now in charge. There's some very complex technical things that have to occur, particularly in the management, command, and control of the air campaign, to make sure that, one, we have no disruption whatsoever in the ongoing operation. Two, that we put none of our air crews at risk as we go through this transition to whatever that follow-on headquarters would be. So there are some complex tasks that have to occur. But I would also say we are ready to begin that process immediately as soon as that follow-on headquarters is identified, and we will accomplish that transition as expeditiously as we possibly can. And I do not see this as being a prolonged situation, but we need that identification of the headquarters, and then we'll begin that process and move on. What will enable that process to move forward very quickly, frankly, is the presence of a very large number of coalition members. We have representatives here at the headquarters at United States Africa Command. More importantly, aboard the Mount Whitney with Admiral Locklear and his staff at the Joint Task Force. Lots of coalition members there at the Joint Force Air Component Command, again, where all these various nations are flying, and they all have representation and are engaged in the management of the air control business. So it's not like we're starting from scratch when this process begins. We have a very robust coalition ongoing now, and we'll be able to make this transition expeditiously once the decision is made.